Hi, this is your host Stephen Beckleiter, and this is part 2 of how I did that. How I photographed the award-winning Phewa Lake in Pokhara, Nepal. In episode 1, my family and I just visited the Peace Pagoda in Pokhara, Nepal. And after staying up there for a while, I looked around and checked out the clouds and kind of obsessed, hoping that it would be cloudy, and the clouds sure enough were moving in. And you can see on our way down, you can see the Lake Phewa and Pokhara in the background. Well, we got into the boat and traveled across Phewa Lake to the other side. And I kept looking at these boats, thinking that, okay, if I just wait a little bit longer and the sun's a little bit lower, I think I'll have a good shot. And this is what I came up with, which this is the shot that actually came out of the camera. And what I'm going to show you next is what I did. This is what the image looked like as a raw file when I put it into Lightroom. As you can see, there's not that much definition, but as I had mentioned earlier, I knew there was a lot in here to work with. So what I always do when I first import my images into Lightroom is I directly go to the detail and I bring up the sharpening and the noise reduction. And from there, I go up to the basic, and I'm also checking my histogram, which is up here, and that's a really good histogram. I can move it over a little bit, slide a little bit, but then I go into the basic. And this is where the fun part, and I believe the magic comes in. So I'm going to keep the temperature as is. I could warm it up a little bit more. Maybe I'll do that. Towards, as you can see, 7,856 Kelvin. The contrast I'm going to bring up a little bit because it's a pretty overcast day and I want to bring out the richness. As you can see, I'm sliding it quite a bit to the right. Highlights, I want to reduce the highlights. Shadows, I want to open up the shadows a little bit in the boats. Whites, I'm going to play around, bring them down a little bit so I begin to see that sort of glow that's happening from that overcast day. And then I'm going to actually see what happens when I open up the blacks a little bit. I'll close it down a little bit. Yeah, this is kind of a very subjective thing. It all depends on what you're seeing. I definitely want to bring up the texture because I want to see more of the waves in the water. That's sort of extreme, and you can see how that would soften it up even more. But I actually like the texture in the water, so I'm going to bring it up more. And then clarity is when it really gets kind of crazy. So watch. I'm going to bring up the clarity to plus 46. And here, dehaze is also another magical slider. As you can see, it gets rid of that haze. It's very similar to the UV filters that you put in your camera. It reduces the amount of haze. But as I see that I do that, I feel I'm going to have to open up the shadows a little bit more to get a little more detail in the boats. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to also kick up the vibrance because these colors are pretty magnificent. Saturation, bring it up a little bit more. So like I said, this is way too much, but a little bit you can kind of see that sort of late evening sunlight that was actually there. It's a beautiful thing to do. So this is one of my favorite modules. It's the HSL, the highlight shadow levels, and or the color, but I usually like the color. So I'm going to start with my red, and you can see that when I reduce it, it makes it a little more, I guess, monochromatic, but when I increase it, I can bring up the reds in the boats more. And also luminance, I want to brighten them up a bit. So, because when the sun was hitting them, they were definitely much brighter. Then I go to my orange, which is a major hue in this scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the luminance first. I usually bring up the luminance because I want to see what areas are affected. I'm going to actually bring it down a little bit more because it was almost dusk. And saturate a little bit. Move on to the yellow. Same thing, start off with the luminance. And if you go too far, you can kind of see it gets kind of pixelated, so I don't want to do that. I want to bring it down more so I don't really see that pixelation. But I do want to saturate a little bit. That's the thing about these controls. You can go too far and then it looks kind of unnatural. So luminance in the greens to bring up the greens in the boats all the way. And I have these colors in the boats too, so I want to bring this up a bit. You can see how it picked up the inside of that boat. And that's the thing. I knew I could do this in post-production and isolate the colors, so I knew this was going to be a really good shot. Let's bring up the blue moors, because I know there's lots of blue in the boat and it's being reflected. Don't need much saturation. Magenta, same thing. And once again, I believe, this is all very subjective, but you kind of get the idea where I'm going. And it's really up to you how you want the things to look. I'm actually going to reduce the orange a little bit, desaturate a little bit, and maybe bring up the luminance a little bit, about right there. So, because I'm going to then bring it into Photoshop, which will be part 3. So split toning, not going to touch. I already did the detail. Lens correction. I love this. I was shooting with a wide angle lens. Actually, you can see a 24 millimeter lens at f8 at 2/50 of a second. And I want to get rid of any kind of corner aberrations of things like that. It sort of cleans it up. You can see it kind of cleaned up the corners. And I can also transform, set mine to constrain crop, hit auto. And not much. It's pretty well level. Oh, nope. Yeah, now it's level. You can see how it kind of changed it all. So, and that's actually all I'm going to do in here. And then I bring it into Photoshop and clean it up and actually intensify the colors a little bit more in the clouds. But all this was done in Lightroom. So you can see before. And so you can see that this is the final look, and it's quite a big difference, right? Kind of nice. Okay, so the next time, my next tutorial will be what I did in Photoshop to kind of clean it up and make it that award-winning photograph.